It was designed to cure mental illness. Instead, it silenced thousands. This is the story of the lobotomy, history's most dangerous medical invention. In the early 20th century, the world of mental health care was a landscape of despair. Overcrowded and underfunded asylums were warehouses for the forgotten, for those whose minds had turned against them. Conditions were often brutal, and treatments were crude, ineffective, or non-existent. For patients suffering from severe psychosis, debilitating depression, or uncontrollable agitation, the future held little more than physical restraints, padded cells, and a slow descent into oblivion. Doctors and families alike were desperate, searching for any glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness, a cure for what seemed incurable. It was into this desperate world that Portuguese neurologist Antonio Egas Moniz stepped. A respected and pioneering figure in medicine, Moniz was already renowned for developing cerebral angiography, a technique that allowed doctors to visualize the brain's blood vessels for the first time. He was a man of science, driven by a profound desire to alleviate human suffering. He saw the hopelessness in the eyes of psychiatric patients and believed that a physical solution could be found within the intricate wiring of the brain itself. His focus turned to the frontal lobes, the region believed to govern personality, social behavior, and higher-order thinking. The catalyst for his radical idea came in 1935 at a neurology conference in London. There, he witnessed a presentation by American scientists who had performed experiments on two chimpanzees, Becky and Lucy. After having their frontal lobes surgically removed, one of the chimps, previously prone to violent tantrums, became remarkably placid and docile. While others saw a curious scientific finding, Moniz saw a potential cure for human madness. He famously asked, "If frontal lobe removal eliminates anxiety in a chimpanzee, why would it not be feasible to relieve anxiety states in man with a similar operation?" The seed of the lobotomy had been planted. Returning to Lisbon, Moniz, who was not a surgeon himself, collaborated with neurosurgeon Almeida Lima to turn his theory into practice. He called the procedure a leucotomy, from the Greek words for white and cut, referring to the brain's white matter. In November 1935, they performed the first operation. It was not the brutal ice pick procedure that would later become infamous. Instead, they drilled two small holes into the patient's skull and injected pure alcohol directly into the frontal lobes, aiming to destroy the neural pathways they believed were responsible for the patient's pathological thoughts. Moniz declared the initial results a success. He reported that his first group of patients showed significant improvement. They were calmer, less agitated, and more manageable. In an era with no other options, this was hailed as a revolutionary breakthrough. The news spread like wildfire through the international medical community. Here, it seemed, was a miracle, a simple surgical solution to the most complex and terrifying of human afflictions. The procedure was praised, and Moniz was lauded as a hero who had dared to venture where no one else would. The culmination of this acclaim came in 1949, when Antonio Egas Moniz was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. The committee cited him for his discovery of the therapeutic value of leucotomy in certain psychoses. It was the ultimate validation from the world's most prestigious scientific body, cementing the lobotomy's place as a legitimate and celebrated medical treatment. But beneath the surface of this celebrated success, a devastating truth was beginning to emerge. The calm that Moniz observed was often a profound apathy. The cure was the eradication of personality. Patients were left emotionally blunted, infantile, and stripped of their creativity, their ambition, and the very essence of who they were. They were no longer agitated, but they were also no longer themselves. The cost of this miracle was the human soul. And Moniz's work, intended as a last resort, had opened a terrifying door that a new generation of doctors would eagerly rush through with even more radical and devastating methods. From its controversial origins in a Lisbon hospital, the idea of psychosurgery spread with alarming speed. It was a radical solution for a desperate time. By the 1940s, psychiatric institutions across the United States and Europe were overflowing, buckling under the weight of patients for whom there were no effective treatments. In this climate of hopelessness, the lobotomy wasn't just seen as an option. For many, it was presented as the option, a supposed miracle that could bring peace to troubled minds and order to chaotic wards. Nowhere did the procedure find a more fervent champion than in America, with the neurologist Walter Freeman. Convinced of its efficacy, Freeman sought to streamline the operation to make it faster, cheaper, and more accessible. He developed the transorbital lobotomy, a brutal but simple technique that required little more than a reinforced surgical pick, resembling an ice pick, and a mallet. No sterile operating room was necessary. Freeman could perform it in his office or even in a patient's home. He became a traveling evangelist for his method, traversing the country in a van he nicknamed the Lobotomobile. He performed thousands of procedures himself, often in an assembly line fashion, demonstrating his technique to eager doctors in state hospitals. In total, an estimated 50,000 lobotomies were performed in the United States alone. The vast majority of these patients never gave their own consent. They were deemed mentally incompetent, their fates decided by desperate family members or overburdened state guardians who were promised a more manageable, docile relative. The procedure was applied with a terrifyingly broad brush. It was used on soldiers returning from war, their minds scarred by trauma we now recognize as PTSD. It was prescribed for housewives suffering from postpartum depression, anxiety, or simply for being difficult. And most chillingly, it was used on children for defiance or hyperactivity. Their personalities, memories, and very sense of self were irrevocably altered or erased. For a time, the press hailed it as a wonder of modern medicine. But behind the sensational headlines and the promises of a cure, a darker reality was unfolding in quiet hospital rooms and private offices across the nation. A procedure intended to heal was becoming a tool to control, to simplify, and to silence. The results were tragic. Patients lost personality, memory, and autonomy. Some died, others lived in silence, institutionalized for life. As criticism grew, the medical community distanced itself. Lobotomies were quietly phased out, but the damage was done, and the silence remains. Before we go, one question. What do we owe the living when history warns us so clearly? The lobotomy era teaches a hard truth. Good intentions need guardrails. Progress without empathy can wound. If this story moved you, don't let it fade into silence. Subscribe to keep these histories alive. Leave your thoughts below. What lesson should we never forget? Share this with someone who thinks quick fixes solve complex lives. Until then, be gentle with yourself and with others. Curiosity and compassion are never wasted. Thank you for watching.